Okay, well, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Welcome to ULT San Diego here for the Aquarian series. Today's presentation is entitled Noetic Psychology, given to us by Mr. Ryan Quirk. Our chairperson for today is Helena Caracasi. Okay, before we begin, a reading. This is from the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 6. Krishna says, "He who unattached to the fruit of his actions performeth such actions as should be done is both a renouncer of action and a devotee of right action. Not he who liveth without kindling the sacrificial fire without ceremonies. Know, O son of Pandu, that what they call sannyas, or a forsaking of action, is the same as yoga or the practice of devotion. No one without having previously renounced all intentions can be devoted. Action is said to be the means by which the wise man who is desirous of mounting to meditation may reach thereto. To cessation from action is said to be the means for him who hath reached to meditation. When he hath renounced all intentions and is devoid of attachment to action in regard to objects of sense, then he is called one who hath ascended to meditation. He should raise the self by the self. Let him not suffer the self to be lowered. For self is the friend of self, and in like manner, self is its own enemy. Self is the friend of a man who is self conquered. So self, like a foe, hath enmity to him who is not self conquered. The self of the man who is self subdued and free from desire and anger is intent on the supreme self in heat and cold, in pain, in pleasure, in honor, and ignominy. The man who hath spiritual knowledge and discernment, who standeth upon the pinnacle and hath subdued his senses, to whom gold and stone are the same, is said to be devoted. When the man so living centers his heart in the true self and is exempt from attachment to all desires, he is said to have attained to yoga. Of the sage of self-centered heart, at rest and free from attachment to desires, the simile is recorded as a lamp which is sheltered from the wind flickereth not. And now we give to you our very own Mr. Ryan Quirk.
Hello, and thank you for that beautiful devotional reading. I'm really excited to be presenting this topic today because it's one of the topics that has interested me most as a, relatively speaking, at least compared to some of the people who are joining us now, a new student to Theosophy. I've been studying Theosophy for close to a year and a half. Could I say 2 years? Yeah, probably more like a year and a half. But I've been endeavoring in other spiritual practices for since I was about 15. I'm 20 now. I'll be 21 in June. And so I'm really excited to bring you a summary of this amazing article, deep article by HPB, worth multiple readings. So I'll do my best. It's much more put into a much. This is an article that you could study for years, and I'm trying to give it to you in about half an hour. So we'll we'll do our best here. And yeah, let's dive into this very rich topic together. So today we're going to be talking about noetic psychology, and specifically from the writings of HPB, as she kind of takes this stand against materialistic science. There was this kind of new revolution from older religious models of viewing life into this newer sense of science. That science became this big thing and this big idea and led to all these innovations. Uh, but along that process and this beautiful awakening of the beautiful and noble practice that is science, there was also some things that got misled. Scientists claiming to have all the answers, egotism being brought into science, and ultimately a kind of disconnect from the heart space that we try to cultivate as students of theosophy. And so we'll look into what she says in terms of, I don't want to necessarily say combating, but correcting some of the misaligned views, maybe, of purely materialistic, atheistic science. Well, can I move to the next slide here? There we go. So some of the ideas that we're going to look at is what science can and cannot explain. We're going to look at the different opinions of materialistic atheistic science and how that kind of got brought into the field of psychology and psychiatry, as opposed to spirituality and the practices in theosophy. We're also going to take a look at why science has a hard problem of consciousness and why, because of this hard problem of consciousness, it is necessary to bring in some sense of spirituality and theosophia. At the very end, we're going to look at the blending and what we're seeing more and more in this kind of new age, this age of transition, as I think many of us are feeling, of the blending of science and spirituality into a more unified idea, that no longer they really have to combat with one another, but that they actually might be pointing the finger at each other. So that'll be something exciting that we will explore. So the way that I want to kind of dive into this article is I took out some passages that stood out to me. Now there were too many passages, really every passage you could have taken out and examined, but these are the ones that most kind of jumped into my consciousness, and I want to explore them with you together. Let me see if I can move this out of the way so I can read properly. There we go. So the first passage is, "The study of the physiology of the soul, of the will in man, and of his higher consciousness can never be summarized into a system of general ideas represented by a brief formula. There is no special organ of will any more than there is a physical basis for the activities of self-consciousness." And later on in that same snippet, she goes on to say, "No physiologist, not even the cleverest, will ever be able to solve the mystery of the human mind in its highest spiritual manifestation." So this is kind of the premise for what HPB goes into, at the very least in the first part of this article, that the evolution of science, and although it led to many amazing discoveries, kind of got a little too in over its head. It's decided that it could solve the mysteries of human consciousness, of consciousness itself, and life in the universe. And HPB does a really good job at kind of reining that idea back in, that there is still so much that science doesn't know, and that science itself has to begin as a philosophy before it is hardened into things that we can call facts. I think about how, not even 60 or 70 years ago, doctors were promoting the idea of smoking cigarettes. And now we know today that that is a very, false idea. And so to blindly follow science is just as blind as blindly following a given religion, and how kind of different religious systems have become more and more corrupt and a little bit more misled from their original esoteric basis in the past. And importantly, from this passage, HPB points to the fact that consciousness cannot be a byproduct of matter because, as we will explore, consciousness precedes what we call physical matter. This is her primary stance that she takes against materialistic science, and also that it is fundamentally wrong of science to take the stance that the cause of consciousness is physical. And it's a fundamentally flawed premise that leads us into the modern age of the hard problem of consciousness. If you don't know, the hard problem of consciousness in science is that scientists don't really understand the origins of consciousness. They don't have any way to make sense of it, in the same way that they don't really understand the origins of creation. They can say it came from the Big Bang, but if you ask any scientist, where did the Big Bang come from? They will tell you, go ask a monk or a philosopher or someone else. So this is really important when we look at HPV's article, when we look at her writing, and we look at the general principles in theosophy as well, and also when we look at the limitations of science. Saying that consciousness has a physical basis is like saying that, or saying that a spiritual essence doesn't exist is like saying that gamma rays or X-rays don't exist because we can't see them with the naked eye. However, as we expand our consciousness and as we heighten our kind of evolution of technology, we realize that we can see things that are naked to just our physical senses, or rather, I should say, invisible to our physical senses. The next passage that we will be exploring is when she says, place half a dozen animals of the same species under the same circumstances, and let their actions, while not identical, will be closely similar. Place half a dozen men under the same circumstances, and their actions will be as different as their characters, their psychic individuality. And then she later goes on to say, an immaterial and spiritual being could not have been discovered amid the blood and filth of a dissecting room. And I think that's very important to note that so much of what we experience, what makes each of us individual, and also what connects each of us, is invisible to just our physical senses. If anyone here has ever had the experience of falling in love, you know that that sensation of love does not exist within the organ that is the human heart, the physical organ of the human heart. It's a feeling, and yet it's one of the most influential and powerful forces that we can experience. In the same way that we can't really see the air around us, but it's the very thing that's giving us life every time we breathe in and every time we exhale, that there is so much more to reality than just what meets the eye. And this is a part of the huge limitation of physical materialistic science. Although it's led to many amazing discoveries and a lot of technological innovation, to try to dissect the entire complexity of the human psyche and the human heart and the human will and the experience of emotions with looking at just molecules and atoms, it just doesn't work. And it hasn't worked, and that's actually what we'll explore later on, uh, about how these shortcomings and how this disconnection from the intuitive spiritual side of our nature when exploring science has kind of cut us off in a sense from finding solutions that are solutions to the challenges that we are being faced with in the world today. So here, HPB gives us a clear and intuitive reasoning for the falsehood of such scientific claims. If I were to tell any one of you that you are strictly a flesh and blood being, that when this body perishes, you will perish, whether or not you believe that, there's something that intuitively feels wrong to that. Even if you ask an atheist, someone who doesn't believe in any sort of divinity or anything else like that, any type of deeper essence, that question, an atheist is still going to feel a little bit off at that statement. There's something within us that kind of awakens when we're told that we're just our physical bodies. There's something that feels constrained and feels limited. But when I tell you that you're a divine spiritual being made of unconditional love, there's something within us that kind of expands and awakens. And that's a super powerful thing not to be overlooked. The fact that our own intuition, that inner voice, that silent whisper within us, is guiding us to a different conclusion than what materialistic science may be giving to us on the surface. In the same way that materialistic science is looking for consciousness in brain cells and molecules, that's the same as trying to look for a painter in their painting. Consciousness is the essence of creation, as theosophy kind of explores, this universal intelligence, this creative intelligence. But when we look for it only in the manifestations of consciousness, it's akin to looking for a painter in their painting. The painting is an expression of them. It's a sign that points that there is a painter, but looking for them in the painting is never going to work. And finally, HPV kind of highlights the idea that creation is a byproduct of this creative universal consciousness, not the cause. And that relationship between cause and effect is something that we're going to explore more deeply as we continue here. The next passage is, psychology, in fact, has become a synonym in many cases for the science of psychiatry. Therefore, students of theosophy, being compelled to differ from all of these, have adopted the doctrine that underlies the time-honored philosophies of the East. And this is something that we're seeing more and more, especially for me as a psychology student, that psychiatry and psychology are really becoming one and the same thing when they're not really the same practice. Psychiatry is attempting to prescribe medications that alter certain chemical structures and chemical constituents within the brain and within the nervous system. And psychology, in its highest sense, noetic psychology, is a much deeper study of the causes of that brain chemistry. For example, modern psychology and psychiatry is attempting to make mentally ill people try to be in a state of functioning, in a state of just kind of getting by. There's not a deeper spiritual virtue that's motivating that idea, except for the fact that we have a kind of general sense of wanting to take other human beings out of their suffering. And so we're giving people medications, but that's the same thing as going into a garden where there's a bunch of weeds and trying to trim off the tops of the weeds instead of pulling them up by the root. When we are treating human beings and their complex mental and emotional experiences only with pills that might give someone a little boost of serotonin or dopamine, we are not treating the root cause of their issues, and this is why we see a modern mental health crisis, as we will explore together. I think it's also important to note that we cannot learn to be happy from those who are unhappy, in the same way we cannot learn anything from someone who does not possess it. And when we look at many of these heavily atheistic, materialistic scientists, they don't really strike us as radiant, happy people. I'm not speaking for everyone, but when I look at the writings of Judge or HPB, you get the sense that there's such a depth there. There's something that draws a person into those teachings and into those writings in a way that reading a textbook doesn't really, it doesn't have the same effect. There's at least in my own life experience, as someone who has once been on depression and anxiety medication and now is off of it, helping another person has brought me way more relief for my symptoms of anxiety and depression than any type of pill or medication ever could. And I think that speaks to the fact that there's something much deeper within the human mind and heart than just this idea of brain chemistry or pills and other things like this. And HPB makes a strong point of this fact that while scientific evolution and technology is wonderful, that it is a shortcoming from, as she says here, the time-honored philosophies of the East. The next passage. The phenomena of divine consciousness has to be regarded as activities of our mind on another and higher plane, working through something less substantial than the moving molecules of the brain. They cannot be explained as the simple result of cerebral physiological processes, as indeed the latter only condition them or give a final form for the purposes of concrete manifestation. This is an idea that we just explored in the last slide, that trying to understand the complexities of someone who's had a mystical experience, of someone who's gone into a deep meditative state, and passing it off as random and chaotic interactions between molecules in the brain. If you try to tell that to a person who's had that type of mystical experience or gone through, let's say, a near-death experience, they're going to tell you that you're crazy, because what they experienced was so much deeper than that. There's a deeper knowing that we all contain that is beyond just these biological and physical processes. And it's important to note that brain chemistry in this kind of in what HPB is exploring here is an effect and not a cause. We think that brain chemistry is random or spontaneous, but what really is the case is that brain chemistry is a side effect of causes that begin in consciousness. We might observe someone who has negative brain chemistry, but then we look and we ask and we say, well, how have they been living their lives? Well, they've been living selfishly. They haven't been taking care of their body. They haven't been cultivating healthy relationships. And they don't really have a strong moral or virtuous compass. And then we see the negative brain chemistry. And now that's a vast simplification of many different expressions of mind and body and health and things like that. So I don't want to make that as just a broad statement for all human beings. But it's important that we look at first causes. Going back to the weed analogy, we can't just cut off the tops of weeds in the garden and expect them to be gone. We have to pull them up by the root. And so we have to look for, when we're looking at the complexities of the human mind and heart, we have to look for causes in consciousness first, in subjective experience first, before we just look at something like brain chemistry. This is also because our immaterial thoughts and intuitive capacities cannot be seen by our physical eyes. Again, just as we can't see X-rays or gamma rays without special equipment. Nevertheless, we still experience them, each of us having thoughts every day and feeling our own intuition to a greater or lesser degree. When one has an inspiring thought, maybe after spiritual study or meditation, there's something going on there that is so much more potent and powerful than just brain chemistry or just molecules interacting with one another. There's something touching an essence that is not physical. I don't remember the exact quote, but in the Bhagavad Gita, it talks about, the essence within each of us that cannot be burned by fire, drowned with water, and eroded with wind or anything like that. There's something within us that can't be touched. And in the same way, when one receives an inspiring idea, when one has a mystical experience, there's something so much deeper than just biological processes. And this is what HPB points out to us in this article time and time again. She's not saying that science is a bad thing. She's saying we must be humble enough to recognize its limitations. In the next passage, this was the final passage that of her article here. And this one I don't even have as many comments on as much as the fact that it just kind of awakens something in me. So I'll read it to you now and see if it touches something in you in the same way that it touched something in me. Blessed is he who has acquainted himself with the dual powers at work in the astral light. Thrice blessed is he who has learned to discern the noetic from the psychic action of the double-faced God in him, and who knows the potency of his own spirit or soul dynamics. I don't have many comments there, just a very beautiful quote, especially that very last part where it says, who knows the potency of his own spirit. Who knows the potency of his own spirit. And that, to me, kind of connects back to the idea that when someone has a mystical experience, when someone experiences a heart awakening experience, it doesn't even have to be a vision. Maybe someone feels overwhelming love for a child or witnesses a beautiful sunset. There's an intuitive knowing of this sense that I am beyond the body, that this isn't just a biological, that what's happening before my eyes, this miracle that we call life, is not just a random set of chaotic events, that there's something deeper at work. We've all had these experiences, these synchronistic moments, these awakening moments. And I think it's important to understand that, and that we come to experience these moments more often when, as HPV says here again, someone who knows the potency of his or her own spirit. And continuing on here. So, in examining that article, HPV takes a bit of a stand against materialistic atheistic science. She again, is not combative against the practice, but rather kind of reels it back in and makes sure that it's connected to its spiritual roots. And because of this, I want to share some quotes from some scientists who kind of begin to point the finger back to that kind of deeper esoteric wisdom. Here's a quote first from Einstein. Everything is energy, and that is all there is to it. Match the frequency of the reality you desire, and you cannot help but get that reality. This is not philosophy, it is physics. And if we begin to think of our own thoughts and emotions as these little frequencies of energy that radiate off of us, that's kind of what Einstein is relaying here. He's almost talking about the principle of karma, that what we put out into the world, we get back in some way, shape, or form. That this energy is connected to everything, and that frequency that we put out, we cannot help but get that reality. And Einstein's scientific quote here, as he says, this is not philosophy, it's physics, makes us maybe want to look at the actions that we're putting out into the world. The physical actions, just as when I throw a ball with a certain mass and velocity, I know it's going to travel a certain distance in space and time. When I am kind to someone, if I understand it from that physics perspective, I know that that kindness is going to come back around to me and hopefully spread to other beings as well. So a very powerful quote there. The next one is from Nikola Tesla. If you wish to understand the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. That one again pointing directly at what Einstein said, that if we want to understand the secrets of the universe, not just what appears on the surface, we can't think in terms of only physical matter and only what meets our senses. We have to think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. This connecting to the idea of, you know, sound being as a primordial force in the universe, and that sound is it's a frequency, it's a vibration, it's an emanation. We think of these, of the, the primal vibration, the creative vibration of Aum, and how that connects to ancient Eastern philosophy. Here is a really fantastic quote. I couldn't even believe when I found this one. This is from Max Planck, the founder of quantum physics. He said that all matter originates and exists only by virtue of a force which brings the particle of an atom to vibration and holds this most minute solar system of the atom together. We must assume behind this force the existence of a conscious and intelligent mind, that this mind is the matrix of all matter. I think that is just incredible, as we start to see, and what we'll dive into as well, some of the discoveries that quantum physics and quantum physicists are making, that the very founder of quantum physics, upon making scientific observations about the atom, said that we must assume that behind this force there is a conscious and intelligent mind. I think that is just so powerful. And I think it invite someone who might be agnostic or atheistic in their thinking to begin to look and see that some of the most profound scientists of our time were pointing the finger at these underlying spiritual realities. And here's a final quote from a teacher that I just love, Dr. Joe Dispenza, a modern teacher. He's a best-selling author of Becoming Supernatural, which I believe was published in 2018. He does kind of retreats and events and meditations all over the world. He says that science is the contemporary language of mysticism. He himself was a scientist who was practicing meditation for a very long time and started to explore these other states of consciousness and kind of had this heart-opening experience, and is now actively doing work in the world to begin to try to blend science and spirituality. Try to blend, we could even say, the mind and the heart, what we see with what we feel, and really making that connection. I think that's just such a powerful quote. Science is, or you could even say that science is becoming the contemporary language of mysticism. Let us continue here. So, as we're exploring that quote, we explore that science and spirituality in the modern day and age are beginning to blend. And this even goes to just a simple philosophical inquiry of what happens when we try to dissect life at its smallest scale. Scientists are constantly observing the forces of nature with microscopes and all kinds of other things to try to look at what reality is. And so when we look at reality, we see that we get down to one of the smallest substances we can find, which is the atom. But then we have to ask then, what is the atom made of? Is that the final step when we continue to dissect down to smaller and smaller pieces? And we find that the atom is made of subatomic particles. And then we ask, well, what are those particles made of? What are they? And what we find is that they're little expressions of energy, information, and light. And that is so powerful because, again, going back to the other quote, we hear Einstein and Nikola Tesla saying that if you wish to understand the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. It reminds me even of the quote in the Old Testament from, I believe it was in Genesis, that says, all things that have been made manifest have been first made manifest by and of the light. In Eastern philosophy, we constantly hear of this divine light, this divine substance that is the maker and actuality of all things. And so I think it's just amazing that as we explore science deeper and we take it a step further and take it a step further and take it a step further, we find that even behind the atom are these little expressions of light, that it kind of comes full circle and begins to connect. And that we also find that these particles in their nature function as either waves of potential or as particles which become the building blocks of our material world, which points to the fact that these particles are not only material in nature, but they actually function both materially in particle form and as waves, just as light waves or sound waves, as energy. And that kind of brings us again to what Einstein said, that matter and energy are not separate. They're the one and the same thing in two different states. And again, we find that HPB and other great teachers of theosophy in this esoteric tradition pointing to that same idea, that there isn't this separation that we see with our senses, that the things around us and even the people around us are not separate from us. This also brings us to the idea of the observer effect in quantum mechanics, that the very act of being consciously aware of something might actually influence it. Now, I'm not a quantum physicist, so I'm not going to dive into that experiment, but if you're curious, I recommend looking up the double slit experiment in quantum physics. It is fascinating, talks about the dynamics of consciousness in our physical world, and again, points the finger at possibility. And so, when we leave the narrow framework of purely materialistic science, we see the noble and true practice of science beginning to point us to a reality of energy and potential. We actually see that spirituality and theosophy and science are kind of telling us the same thing. We see that we live in a quantumly entangled world where by affecting any one particle, another entangled particle across vast distances of space gets affected with no lapse in time. I think that's just fascinating, that if these particles, this quantum phenomena is entangled, that the building blocks of our reality are not separate, what does that make of each of us? That maybe we can see ourselves in the cosmic ocean as kind of like quantumly entangled particles ourselves. Each of us these little sparks of light, that when I'm kind to you, I'm also being kind to myself. And when someone is kind to, and just this chain reaction, this idea that everything is connected that we see in Buddhism as well. And so, as I'll make a note here, I'm not a scientist or a physicist, specifically not a quantum physicist. But if you ask AI, or you do a quick YouTube search or Google search about quantum physics, you're going to see some very spiritual, kind of mystical ideas being pointed to. I think it's a fascinating thing to explore. And while prior materialistic scientists tended to chop the world into separate bits and pieces, quantum field theory tells us that everything across all distances of space and time is connected, that everything exists as a part of a universal oneness, which is one of the core tenets and pillars of theosophy and many esoteric spiritual traditions. And so I want to point now, as kind of HPB did, to, as she pointed to some of the shortcomings of modern science and this disconnected from materialistic science, from the more heartfelt, intuitive space within us, and what that's led to. Although we've seen many innovations of technology and planes and trains and cars and smartphones and all these things, I want to read you some stats here and some ideas that kind of show us where we're coming to a shortcoming. According to the CDC and the National Institute of Health, nearly 70% of Americans are on pharmaceutical medications indefinitely. One person commits suicide every 11 minutes. 1 out of every 5 Americans has been diagnosed with symptoms of depression or anxiety. Younger generations have never been more stressed out and mentally unhealthy, and lifespan is going down in the United States. And I'm paraphrasing a quote here that I believe is from HPB, where she says that psychologists entering the Aquarian age will be very, very busy. And that is in no small part due to the ramifications of following materialistic science as a religion instead of as a tool that can help deepen our spiritual understandings. Because when we follow materialistic science blindly, this is what we get. We get not only a nation, but a world that is at war with each other. We get people who are mentally and physically unhappy and unhealthy. So what this does lead to, though, despite some of this kind of those negative statistics, is that there's a great room for what HPB is sharing. There's a great room for noetic and theosophical psychology. I would say that nowadays, maybe you guys have observed this in your own lives, that people are looking for answers. People are actively wondering, how can I find a deeper connection to life? How can I be kinder to my neighbor? How can I live a happier existence? I love the quote from Albert Einstein so much where he says, the definition of insanity is trying the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. And that's kind of what materialistic science has been doing. When we look at psychiatry as a practice, we've been trying all these different medications and SSRIs and things like this, and there's nothing wrong per se with these medications, but we're also not seeing much improvement in the collective mental and physical health of our culture. If anything, we're actually seeing a worsening of this because we're treating effects and not causes. The deeper cause, I believe, of the physical and mental distress, especially in Western culture, that we see is that we're out of touch with our spiritual nature. We're out of touch with the part of us that wants to be kind and loving, where we feel like these separate, finite, limited beings. And so we're pursuing things only for the sake of ourselves and our own self preservation, which is fundamentally flawed because if you only view yourself as a physical body, that is something that fundamentally is limited. So you will always feel limited. However, what this offers room for is when we bring in the principles in theosophy of universal brotherhood and meditation and self study, and we combine it with what we've learned through psychological and psychiatrical practice, we begin to really touch something deeper. We blend spirituality and science in a new way that doesn't just treat the tops of the weeds of human consciousness, but begins to really get at the root. We begin to really plant new seeds for a much brighter future and remove the old weeds of past karma. And we're seeing this emerge in the widespread mindfulness movement in the West, psychedelic therapies, interest in yoga and spirituality. That's something I've been seeing a lot amongst my generation. And so, with that exploration, Jonathan asked me to share a little bit about me and why I'm so passionate about this topic of psychology, of the teachings of theosophy. And so, I'd like to share that with you now. As I said in the beginning, my name is Ryan Quirk. I'm originally from Boston. I grew up as an athlete and I became fascinated in the world of sports psychology, specifically after breaking my arm when I was like 14 years old. And I kind of went through this challenge where I was struggling with anxiety and I was very afraid to get back out and play my sport of hockey. And so I started exploring practices like meditation to kind of work through that traumatic experience and find a deeper state of healing and relaxation so that I could enjoy my sport. And that led me into, as I'll say here, my intro to spirituality, which was I was asking about meditation, and my grandfather's a psychologist, and he worked with Ram Dass, who many of you may have heard of his teachings. He was the author of Be Here Now. And I found out later that Ram Dass not only worked with my grandfather, but he grew up in my hometown of Newton, Massachusetts, right outside of Boston. And because of this, I took up a serious meditation practice at 15 years old, and this led me from originally wanting to be a pro hockey player or a businessman. That was kind of my original plan for what I wanted to do with my life. But deciding after going through these various awakenings to want to be a psychologist instead, to really try to understand the complexities of human consciousness. And also after viewing many of my peers struggling with mental health, both in my high school alone, in the 4 years that I was there, I believe we had, it was 9 or 11 suicides, which is extremely, extremely high. That's more than a kid per year, which is just, it was, very, very sad. And so it made me want to understand why are people going through this, as well as going through my own struggles with anxiety and things like that. And so through this, after graduating high school, I took a gap year, and synchronicity led me to Santa Barbara, where a well-known ULT member, Kirk, who I believe is on this call, he might not be, became my landlord, although it feels weird calling him that because really he's been such a great mentor and a friend to me and introduced me to theosophy about a year and a half ago. I'm currently attending SBCC and I'll graduate in the spring with my associates in psychology to continue this understanding of the mind and the body and these practices. And I plan on transferring to get my bachelor's, and hopefully, in taking up psychology and in practicing psychology, I can combine some of these spiritual practices with modern psychology to help treat human beings who are going through a tough time. I published my first book at 18 years old, and it's soon to be republished under the new title, The Journey of Self-Mastery. I'm not too concerned about that, but it's available on Amazon and will be soon, and also on my website, rqselfmastery.com. My passion personally, and the reason I was so excited to give this talk when Jonathan invited me, is because I love finding ways to aid the challenges that are facing humanity. I love understanding the human mind, the human body, the human heart after going through challenges in my own life and witnessing people close to me go through challenges. It's just it just feels like my calling in every way, shape, and form. I personally have decided to pursue this passion through a lot of self-experimentation with techniques like meditation and visualization and prayer and other types of spiritual practices and integrate them into mind, body, spirit wellness. And my overarching intention is to enjoy this journey that I am on and that we're all on together, and hopefully, to the best of my ability, be a loyal servant of love every step of the way and to aid humanity however I can. My final thoughts after reviewing this article is that HPB does one of the best examinations of not only the important role, the necessary role of theosophy in a world dominated by materialistic science, but also of the shortcomings of materialistic science. Personally, growing up, I've seen the deepening connections between the world of quantum physics and the New Age spiritual movement and a deeper relationship between science and spirituality. And I think through approaching science with an open mind and by looking for causes rather than effects, we'll see this relationship between spiritual practice and science grow and grow ever more beautifully. And also, witnessing my generation, being a 20-year-old and having two younger brothers, I've never seen a time where spirituality and theosophy is more needed in the realm of modern psychology, science, and psychiatry. Thank you.
Hey, thank you, Brian. Can I be heard?
Yes, I can hear you.
Brian, that was amazing. You're how old?
I'm 20 years old. I'll be 21 June 1st.
Wow, that was just amazing. Welcome back to the Theosophical movement. I think there's so much there, and Boston is a wonderful spiritual center. Yeah, I spent a lot of time there, and it's a great center. It really is. So now we're going to, I guess, go to questions or thoughts or responses that people have. So I think the first hand I see up is Maluka.
Good afternoon and happy springtime for everybody. What a gift you gave us today, Ryan. Welcome back to your path. You are a very, very old soul and you are a teacher. I have learned so much from your inspiring, moving talk. I think you're going to be whatever you choose to do in life, I think you're going to help a lot of people because you have a lot of great, not only you are very intelligent and you express yourself with great facility, but also I can feel your love for what you're doing. And I think we need more people like you. I'm going to suggest for you to try to find on YouTube a talk of an old theosophy who's no longer around us. Ian Stevenson. He wrote, you're familiar with him?
I know Ian Stevenson. I actually had in my notes. I was just I was a little concerned on time because I wanted to leave room for some dialogue.
Oh, so you're familiar with him?
I love his work and his research and his teachings.
Fantastic. And he even I found recently a video as well. I don't know if you have seen the video.
I've only checked out his
books,
his database, and his books, but I will have to check out the videos as well. So
yeah, it's magnificent. So congratulations, and like I said, it's a great honor to have experienced your thoughts, beautiful thoughts, and I am just so moved and inspired. Thank you for that.
Thank you for your comments.
You're welcome.
Desiree.
Hi, Ryan. Do you see me okay? That was a wonderful presentation, Ryan. You may be a new student, but I doubt very seriously you're a new student, if you catch my drift. My father used to say, and I want your take on this, that if people would spend less time dwelling on their own problems and concerning themselves with helping others, that half, and of course this is not scientific, but he believed that half of the mental illnesses would disappear. What's your thought on that?
I completely agree with those wise words from your father. I think it's kind of like a little karmic cycle, which is the less we help others, the worse our mental health gets, and the worse our mental health gets, the more easy it is to slip into self-obsession and a feeling of like I, me, mine. How can I get what I need? And I think it's one of those things where people can't even see their own predicament, where they're so obsessed with like, okay, well, I'm depressed, so how do I help myself? And I'm depressed, and how do I help myself? And it just becomes this kind of endless karmic loop. And I've heard from a great teacher who's actually kind of like more of like a business guru than a spiritual teacher, but Tony Robbins says what he recommends his clients to do when he's giving life coaching with them is if they're depressed, just go volunteer at a homeless shelter for a day or go work at a soup kitchen for a day or anything like that. It's uh it's absolutely necessary, and I think that's why when we bring theosophy and spirituality into the practice of psychology and counseling and therapy for people who are struggling with mental illness, because it's such a real thing. I mean, it's so prevalent now that we'll have more of those therapies. I wonder if that even be a type of therapy. Like instead of getting handed a little pill bottle, like someone literally writes someone a prescription to go volunteer somewhere. I think that would be really fantastic.
I hope so. Thank you.
Let's see. ULT, somebody, ULT San Diego host has their hand up.
Yes, it's me, Monica. Ryan, first of all, I just wanted to say, way to go, way to go. Thank you so very much. It was a brilliant presentation, and what this student experienced as like the perfect combination of jnana yoga, of study, the mind, the intellect, and a devotion of bhakti yoga, not at all leaving the heart out of the equation. And so I really appreciate that. But I have a question. Now, you made, I think there was a quote from HPB, or either you said it yourself, something regarding the Aquarian age. Oh yes, busy, busy, busy. The doctors are going to be very busy in the Aquarian age. And this student, if I understand correctly, the Aquarian age is that cycle, that time period where man is going to have to, because of all kinds of karmic influences, depend on himself. Um, and so that has frightening connotations, but it also has inspiring connotations. So I wonder if you have any thoughts about that. The person who doesn't necessarily belong to an organized religion, or, as you say, has all kinds of questioning within himself. What do you imagine somebody who is relatively disconnected and materialized by society? What idea do you have in a practical sense?
Yeah, well, it's a fantastic question, and I'll make a few short comments and then turn it over to Helena as well, because I know she's a practicing psychologist, and I'd love to hear from her.
Wonderful.
A few quick comments. The the sign of Aquarius and just what that represents is kind of this. It's this idea of intellect and transformation and specifically transformations in the way that we think. And when we think back to that kind of garden analogy of the human consciousness, that what we plant is what we get. And recently we've, instead of been uprooting past karmic seeds, we've kind of just been trimming off the weeds of them and not really looking at the deeper causes. That will kind of come to its end in the Aquarian age. And that's why psychologists are going to be busy, because psychologists are going to be doing this work, hopefully, of blending the necessary missing elements from what the practice has already been built up from. And I heard this analogy from another spiritual teacher that the Aquarian age will kind of be like when you squeeze a watermelon seed. It's you just squeeze it, squeeze it, squeeze it, squeeze it. It's very, very, you can't break it. And eventually you squeeze it so tight that poof, it shoots out in another direction. And I think that's kind of what's happening to the human mind and heart. We're getting almost backed into a corner, which can feel scary at first, but it's forcing us to look at those old seeds, those old weeds within our minds and hearts. And I think that, like you said, will be very powerful. It'll be kind of a rough and bumpy transition, but it'll lead to something very beautiful. Just like, pressure makes diamonds. That's another analogy as well. And Helena, I'd love to hear more from you as well on this.
Thank you, Ryan.
Okay. So, I was, well, and I'm familiar with it from my own practice. I'm devastated by the numbers, the suicidal numbers of the high school students and the enormous pressure that kids are under these days. What do you think, Ryan, is one of the biggest causes of this pressure that the kids are feeling? I'm just curious. I know I can feel it, I can sense it, but do you have a sense of where the pressure is coming from that we can address?
I would say that kids feel this pressure and this disconnect because they're living in an entirely new age. The age of technology and social media is something that my parents didn't have growing up. And so it's like being forced to navigate a new world when you're just a kid, when you have no understanding of the world yet. And I think that's extremely difficult. And it also means that, my younger brother, he's a 15-year-old high school student now. He's doing better. But when he was 12, he was so anxious he couldn't even go to school. And so they got him a psychologist, and this psychologist obviously intended well, but he was about, 70, 75 years old, Harvard graduate, and he couldn't relate to what my younger brother was saying because he didn't have to deal with those challenges himself. When my brother said that his phone makes him anxious, he didn't know what to do or what to say. And then there's also this, because not only does my generation not understand how to navigate it, but because the older generations don't either, then there's this kind of just tension where older generations are putting blame on my generation, saying my generation or kids around my age are young adults around my age are just anxious, or they're just, they don't really know how to handle their problems. Back in my day, I was just tougher. I was just, I pushed through things a little more. And I think that creates this disconnect. I'm a hockey player, so I've had so many coaches, take the tough love approach, and sometimes it's good to get a little tough love and say, hey, pick it up. You got to do this, you got to do that. But I think we need so much more of that feminine approach of just unconditional love and compassion. I think we really need to listen to each other, and I think that's where the disconnect kind of comes in.
Thank you. I see Ken.
Yes. Hello there. I'm here in the lodge in San Diego, and I want to say thank you, Ryan, for this cogent and really clear, concise summary of HPB's article and bringing it forward through the 1800s and 1900s and now into a whole 2 centuries later to make it relevant to us today. And I really enjoyed meeting you, some months ago here in San Diego when you and Kirk were visiting. I'd love to collaborate more with you and Helena as well. I happen to be a psychiatrist. And one hypothesis I had about all these killings that started, I guess, in 1998 with Columbine, the school killings and teenagers becoming violent. The hypothesis is that elementary school kids, kindergartners, do not sing together as much as they did. And there's more homeschooling where the children are not socialized with one another. So I'm not a psychologist, so I don't know what you guys think about this. But back in the 1970s, my mother, who was a kindergarten teacher, gave me her spinet piano, said, we don't have time to sing in kindergarten anymore. I've got so much documentation that the kids know their colors and their numbers. We don't have time to sing. And so I got her piano. And I'm thinking, if there's been generations of alienated children at home schools, not integrating with other kids, and elementary school kids not singing, or going to church and not singing, or not even going to church, that is one form of community building that's been missing for decades, and then has resulted in this yet another element of the alienation that our cell phones bring with us. But that alienation, that lack of human-to-human interaction, has strengthened what HPB calls the delusion of separateness. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I entirely agree. And I also think too, what we're seeing more and more is not just the idea of like homeschooling, but kids who are around each other are being forced to compete instead of collaborate with each other. I mean, I saw this as a high school athlete that parents were saying you got to be the best. You know, if you're not the best on the team or you don't beat out that kid or get a better grade than them or if you don't get an A, then, everything's going to be wrong. There's so much less of that community collaboration. And I think that young kids feel very isolated. And then when young kids are interacting now, instead of interacting face to face, they're interacting online. So if the threat of a face to face bully wasn't enough, at least with a face to face bully, you kind of know what you're getting. You might get shoved into a locker and that's no fun, but you kind of deal with it. But online, that's permanent. That gets put online can stay there forever. And the cyberbullying that's going on now, and someone you don't even know hiding behind a fake profile could be bullying you, talking bad about you, saying other things and doing other things. And I think there's so many factors. I think to isolate one factor as it's this or it's that, I think we really have to look at the whole picture because there's so many different causes. It's partially the smartphones, it's partially the social media, it's partially just the cultural attitudes around kids' performance in school and athletics and in music, and this idea of not pursuing what feels true to them. I think it's partially what we see in a culture that has become disconnected from the simple, quiet, intuitive wisdom of their own hearts rather than the kind of noisy, overcomplicated analytical mind that typically can work together really synergistically, but now in a way that we're seeing that the heart's being completely ignored. I heard from Ram Dass that the mind is an amazing, beautiful instrument and servant to the heart. But now we live in a culture where the heart is becoming subservient to the mind, and that's why we're seeing so many of these issues.
Thank you.
Yes, and Elena, do you have any thoughts about the music and sound? I think it somehow connects to this idea of the logos and this foundational vibration of the universe that in our manifested form shows up as singing together as one element. But I do believe in multifactorial. That was like the mantra of my psychiatry training. I was at the Mayo Clinic, and it's all multifactorial. There's no one thing that explains anything. But do you believe there's a connection with kids singing together and the logos and this foundational sound of the universe?
I think so. I think sound is crucial. And what I see, well, the kids in my family doing are there has been music associated with dancing as well. I see some of these performers who, the kids are trying to imitate, the dance steps that go with, and they're sort of working out with music, um, which I think is a healthy thing. I wish that there was more an emphasis on which I've seen in schools like in Holland, um, where the morning is for learning, the afternoon is for exercise and being outside and playing and getting fresh air and on the physical plane. And I always did music in the afternoon with the small kids, and it was or we would sing our multiplication tables. I mean, just use as many of our senses as we could, and it's a great feeling to harmonize together. To sing together. But Laura has had her hand up for quite a while. Laura, I'm sorry to keep you waiting.
Yes. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
You've covered a lot of what was in my question about the noetic psychology and how to help each other get in touch with that side of our nature. And this is not a new problem. It was a problem at the time of HPB. Edmund Holmes wrote a book on what is and what might be, and he said that when we deny children their higher nature or their noetic nature, we leave them at the mercy of their lower nature. And we've been a lot of educators have written books over the last 100 years covering this problem, but the materialism of the age seems to be overwhelming us. And so it seems that we need to create a few structural changes, not just individually in the psychology of our children, but structural changes within our society itself that helps people to stay in touch with their noetic side. I wondered if you had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, that is completely and utterly true. I think when we look at political structures and educational structures, I often joke that as a young kid, I was taught more about how tall King Tut was than how to manage the most basic emotions and thoughts that I had. I was taught more about complex and advanced algebra than I was about how to take care of my own body. And I think that's the fundamental flaws. We've become so specialized in our culture. Like if you suddenly get diagnosed with a rare disease, what being in the West is a great place to be. There's certain specialists and surgeons and doctors and things like that. And yet the most basic, simple challenges we face with nutrition, health, mental health, being stressed, our most uh, our most educated in school doctors who have been through over a decade of medical schooling don't know how to help people. And I think it's exactly what you said. It's not only an individual thing of a relationship between a psychologist and a client, but it's also a structural thing that fundamentally our paradigm, our intention, our culture has to change. I mean, at least where I'm from, the intention in the high school was, have my kid be the best so my kid can get more from the world. And instead of the intention of, I want to raise a happy, healthy kid. I mean, when I look at like when I looked back at one of my yearbooks from elementary school, and they asked you, what do you want to be when you grow up? And a lot of kids were already saying like lawyer, doctor, and maybe they really did want to be that. Maybe that was their parents' influence. But I did see a few kids say, I just want to be happy, or I want to own a fairy princess castle, or go play by the beach and things like that. And that's not to say that we shouldn't be preparing our kids for the world and shouldn't be preparing them to endeavor in wonderful careers and important, powerful careers and things like that. But I think we've lost touch with the core intention, which is the whole reason educational systems are there in the first place. The whole reason that governmental systems should be there in the first place is that we can have happier, healthier societies, have people live happier, healthier lives. So I completely agree with your point. The solution, I don't know. I think this talk is a good start, but it's going to take a lot more work than that. But that's exciting. We can crack at it for many lifetimes.
Thank you very much. And your talk was wonderful. Another book I read long ago when I was your age was by Richard Maurice Buck, a Canadian, and he wrote Cosmic Consciousness. And as a psychiatrist, that's what he found. He would heal people, get them all back to normal, but then they would have to go back out into a society that wasn't functioning, that a society was sick. And so then they would come back in again, you know. So, just trying to that's a good book to read, Cosmic Consciousness. It's quite interesting too, because it goes into that noetic side of our nature as well. But thank you very much.
Thank you, and I will definitely check that out. And someone in the group just sent me the original comment from HPB about psychologists, in which she said, when it enters, as in the age of Aquarius, in a few years, when we enter in a few years the sign of Aquarius, psychologists will have some extra work to do, and the psychic idiosyncrasies of humanity will enter on a great change. So I just wanted to mention that to the group, and thank you for those comments.
That brings to mind one more thing. I don't think in the evolution of our humanity that maybe all this difficulty that we're having is not necessarily a bad thing. We're becoming more aware of our natures because these things weren't talked about 50 years ago, 60 years ago. So the very fact that we're creating a language to talk about them is maybe indicative of an evolution taking place.
I think that is a beautiful, beautiful point. It's it reminds me of a quote that a spiritual teacher said, which is, when you start to step more and more into the light, you don't become less aware of the things that were previously in the dark. The light radiates and even begins to encompass those things and brings up those things and illuminates those things. And I think, just to your point, that is just that's what's happening. You know, we're seeing more challenges, but because of those challenges, we're seeing more innovation and more conversation and more education around these ideas. So thank you for those beautiful, beautiful comments.
Thank you. I see, I don't know if I'm pronouncing this correctly. Vimal?
I thank you so much for this wonderful talk, Ryan. And truly, it's amazing that you're so young and you have so much wisdom inside you. I just wanted to just bring up this point that ancient wisdom or theosophy has always been having new teachers. So the new wisdoms that have come around in the last century is of Krishnamurti, and what he says about not be nobody. That's what he says. Don't try to be something or somebody. Just be nobody, which means live without an image. And the biggest problem is the images that we have of ourselves, which causes the biggest problem to us. Now, in this, I mean, this has been said from the times of the Buddha, where he said there is no atta or atma inside us. There's no self there. And later on in theosophy, what we study is we seem to be just a collection of things. Our body is a collection of atoms and molecules. Our emotions are a collection of elementals. Our mind are also a collection of a different kind of elementals. So we just seem to be this huge mosaic of so many things floating inside, which we call that one thing which you call ourselves. Now, the thing here is that if one looks at what Krishnamurti is saying, there's a lot of healing in that. And maybe we could look at how can Krishnamurti's teachings of this thing called living without images in a state of awareness, where that is sort of a healing method. Maybe people can explore that also as one more thing to help this whole business of being a human.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I want to be aware of time. I see Jonathan at the stand there. I know we have, what is it, 4 more minutes? Jonathan, am I good to answer this final comment?
Yeah, you can go over.
All right.
So let's make sure we end maybe 5 minutes before the top of the hour.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, I personally thank you so much for those that comment and that question. I love the teachings of Krishnamurti, and he was a beautiful, wonderful teacher. The way that I've kind of brought that into a Western psychology thing, because if I were to just go up to a classmate and say, "Be nobody, have no self-image," and they're going to be like, "What? Like I'm an athlete, I'm an aspiring doctor, I'm this." You know, we have these self-identities to get along in the world. The way Ram Dass puts it is, you kind of wear it like a light coat, which is, it's helpful. It's a tool. When I say that I'm a hockey player or I'm from Boston, I use these things to kind of form my sense of self in the world. They're light. I'm not so attached to them. I'm using them as a way to navigate. Whereas he says that for a lot of people, these identities that we have, I'm this or I'm that, become like these huge, heavy trench coats. And we think that there's no way of stepping outside of it. And in the realm of psychology, it especially comes up when someone says, I am depressed. You know, I've just dealt with this depression for so long, and they actually start to form their own image and sense of self around the depression. So I don't necessarily think it's about eliminating that sense of self and these identities. You know, we need them to get along in the world, right? Like, I'm a student, I'm an athlete, I'm a yoga instructor, I'm this, I'm that. I don't think those are necessarily bad. The question then becomes, are we wearing them like a nice light coat, or are they becoming these heavy, encompassing trench coats that bind us to something and limit our true nature, or what could be called not the absence of self, but the truest self in us, which is that divine self?
Thank you.
Thank
I
you.
was I was also wondering, well, when I look up the roots of the word consciousness, what it comes up with is knowing with others, sharing knowledge with others. And I don't know that we necessarily think of consciousness that way, as the ability to share knowledge with each other. And to your point, service. There's something about helping other people or being with them, just standing alongside them as they're walking through their life and their karma and the collective karma that brings a joy, to our being. That sense of connection enlivens us, it vivifies us, I think. And the heart quality also, I think, was a great point that you brought up, that heartbeat of the universe, that frequency. And there's a joy, in sharing knowledge, not just keeping it to yourself, but sharing it with others and helping to uplift them in a good way, in a healing way. That was the point of her article. What do you think about what she said about the astral light? There are three in Theosophy. We say there are three planes of human consciousness, right? The sleeping, the waking, the dreaming. Um, how how would you help someone understand what is meant by the astral light if they first came to Theosophy?
Are you asking that to me?
To you. To
Okay.
you.
Um,
Or to the class or to
I-
anybody.
yeah, I would go back to the analogy of air, which is air is around us all the time, constantly surrounded. It's so intimate and so close to us, and we can't see it, but we can feel it. So if I were to drive my car really fast and put my hand out the window, I could actually begin to feel the air. But in general, I don't really necessarily feel the air or am that aware of it. And in the same way, just because we can't see the astral light with our physical eyes, although some seers and some sages can, for most of us, we can't see it all the time. Those effects are still there. For example, we might enter into a new environment, a new place, go somewhere with someone, and all of a sudden we just feel this intense heaviness or this intense negativity. Understand that that might not be coming from just within us. In the same way that air is all around us, that might be coming from an unseen force. Or the opposite effect, which is when we randomly feel inspired. All of a sudden, we've been in kind of a dark, dreary spot. We've been asking for help and not really knowing where to turn. And we just get this idea, I got to begin a meditation practice. Or we are like, I got to go for a walk. And we go for a walk and we turn the corner and we see a United Lodge of Theosophists. We go, oh, the universe is leading me in these subtle ways. So the astral force, that astral light, is unseen, but it affects us in the same way that radio waves are unseen. But the moment we tune the radio dial to the right station, we begin hearing music. And we can tune into what forces are helping us versus hurting us by how much they resonate with the force of love, which is if we're seeing or feeling or intuiting forces that make us feel fear or negative or scared, that those are probably negative forces and we should step away from them and breathe and relax. But when we feel those inspirations and they feel like joy, they feel like love, they feel calm and wise, that is kind of the universal way of leading us into a new path.
Thank you. Jonathan, you have your hand up?
Sure. I think this fits in with your question, Helena, also, and Ryan's response. This you had in one of your slides, Ryan. First of all, wonderful talk. Thank you so much for that. But you had in one of your slides about how the last sentence in her article was saying, "Blessed is he who has acquainted himself with the dual powers at work in the astral light. Thrice blessed, his own spirit or soul dynamics." What do you think about these dual forces, and how that might be part of the psychic and noetic thing, dynamic, right? And kind of the difference between the psychic and the noetic, I guess. And then to make it all that much more complicated, how would we be able to kind of discern through these in terms of impulses and things in our own consciousness?
That's a brilliant question. It's a deep question that I could spend a lot of time on, but I'll do my best to kind of condense it. When we begin to understand creation, we think of not only dualities but also trinities. So magnetic forces have a positive and a negative pole. We have masculine and feminine energies within us. We have it's these dual forces at work, but when we add in the element of the Trinity, that's kind of the point that stands in between. We could almost say that it's outside of that duality. And so I think what HPV is kind of alluding to us here is when one begins to understand and discern between those dual forces, to choose the ones that are more positive. And you specifically mentioned that when we get those impulses, how can we discern whether or not they're positive or negative impulses? And typically, I'm not saying this is just a universal guideline, but what I've found in my own life is that I know an impulse is a good impulse if it's going to feel better after I do it. For example, eating a donut is delicious and it feels really good the moment that it touches our lips, but afterwards we feel bad. Saying an angry comment at someone that we're mad at feels really good while we're doing it. I think we can all admit that if we're angry at them, but after it feels really bad. And it's funny because the wiser thing to do is to do the things that might not feel initially as good, but we can discern their kind of positive influence in our lives if they feel better after. Forgiving someone who we're mad at can feel really, really hard, but after we feel lighter. Going on a nice nature walk, even if we're a little tired or we've had a long day, can kind of be like, I don't really want to get up and go for that walk, but we always feel better after. And so I think what she's kind of referring to there is one who is discerning between those forces, getting better at understanding which impulses are which, and also that third aspect of that point which lies beyond just the positive and negative polarities, that is the deepest essence within us. It's beyond positive and negative, masculine and feminine, or even the dualities of mind and heart, wisdom and love. It's that unnameable essence within us, and that when we begin to touch that, blessings just start occurring in our lives and really in the lives of those around us.
Wow, thank you. Oh, that gives you give me so much hope. I mean, I like to remind the kids that uh, they were born into this moment. They were made for this moment, and even if it looks overwhelming, with all the karma, ancestral karma, Atlantis coming back, all the technology, clearly you were here because it's your world, and you're up for it. You're up for it. So you put a lot of joy and hope into my heart. I don't know about Jonathan. What do you think? Are we good now?
I am really grateful for this talk. Monica's reminding me to scan the chat here. Let's see here. Here's one. Okay. Well, here's one from Miluka, but I want to take a look at the other one. What about applying the 3 qualities required to enter the Pythagoras Lyceum to children? For example, school candidates must know about music, geometry, and mathematics. That ties in with Ken's question about the music, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that is wonderful. I think it's partially because, Pythagoras, what a brilliant teacher. Music, geometry, and mathematics, something that I wish I was better in those fields. I'm not. But I think it's because those fundamental fields of study give us such deep insight into the nature of reality, that we can really begin to dive deep and understand the divine through those ideas. I have a photo on my desktop of the spiral that's on like a conch shell, and then the spiral that's in the galaxies, and how that in the microcosm, the macrocosm, everything in nature is connected. And we can understand that through geometry. We see that certain exploding nebulae look like human eyes, and that's geometry made manifest in the cosmos. And we can begin, when we study geometry, we understand the connection of those things. Same thing with sound too. The way that sound and music follows these certain patterns and just like touches us on such a deep level. If you've ever listened to a song that's made you cry, or listened to a song where you were having kind of a tired, lethargic day and you just feel suddenly inspired, that's magic right there. That's an unseen force. I don't see the music entering my ears and vibrating my eardrums, but I feel it in every cell of my body. I think that too, and I think with mathematics, that ties directly in with geometry, and seeing the way in which precisely everything is balanced. In the way that scientists describe that if we were just a little bit further away from our sun or a little bit closer, life wouldn't be possible on planet Earth. And just all these other things, that there is a precision to the way that the divine works through nature. And I think that studying those three things, as Pythagoras taught, gives us an insight into just the awe-inspiring nature of the divine and of the creative consciousness that upholds the cosmos.
Thank you, Ryan. I just wanted to say thank you very much for your talk, and very, very much. And Helena, do you have any closing thoughts?
Well, just that to his point about bandying around these words of depression and anxiety. These are heavy words that we throw around and throw medication at like candy. A real clinical depression is way different than what we perceive of it, and so we have to be careful with our choice of words. But one thing we can do is to teach self-regulation, I think, in the schools, because as Ryan was saying, we don't give the kids a practical, useful for daily life way of self-regulating, when that might be what they need most. And whether it comes from music or meditation or sharing or service, that's what we really need more of, as opposed to more math, more science. That has its place, but it seems to be out of balance, with and confusing, I think. We need some better ideas in education, and I'm sure that's what it's about now, right? We're rethinking how we're going about education and what our priorities are. So you want to announce the upcoming talks now, John? Or and
Yeah.
thanks again, Ryan. That was wonderful.
Well, just one last thing from Eileen here. Thank you very much for your clear, articulate, and compassionate presentation of HPB's thought on noetic psychology as compared to modern scientific ideas. Most inspiring and helpful in this Aquarian age. Very lovely.
Mhm.
And yeah, so it is, what is it? Sloth and what? Laura, help me out. It's going to be Laura. Vigilance? And vigilance.
Vigilance and sloth, and it's a great follow-up for today's talk. I
Really?
like the idea of diamond is formed under pressure. We have to have these two forces. And I would beg to differ with Ryan. He has a perfect understanding of music, geometry, and mathematics, because it is about unity and diversity, balance and precision, and understanding the building blocks of the cosmos. So, I think that he shows that he has a great understanding of those three things. Thank you.
And thank you, Helena, for your wonderful job with chairing.
Thanks, Helena. Beautiful.
Great to see you all.
Have a good week, everybody. Thank you.
Have a good week. Have a
Thank
great
you.
week.
Yes.
Blessings.
Good night.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jonathan.
You all.
Bye.
Take good care.
Thank you.
Bye.